My name is Marcus Thompson, and what I'm about to tell you will make your blood boil. It's a story about greed, corruption, and how a small group of power-hungry individuals tried to steal everything I'd worked for over the past 15 years. But more importantly, it's about how I fought back and won. It was a Tuesday morning in October when my life changed forever. I was out in the back pasture, checking on my cattle like I do every morning at sunrise, when I heard the sound of car doors slamming near my house. From where I stood, I could see 3 black SUVs parked in my driveway, vehicles I didn't recognize. My German Shepherd, Duke, was barking his head off, which was unusual because he's typically friendly with visitors. As I walked back toward the house, I could see 5 people in business suits standing on my front porch. The woman in the center was holding a clipboard and what looked like official documents. My gut immediately told me this wasn't good news. I'd heard stories from other rural property owners about government officials showing up unannounced, but I never thought it would happen to me. "Mr. Thompson," the woman called out as I approached. She was tall, probably in her 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her smile was the kind that didn't reach her eyes, the smile of someone who's about to deliver bad news and doesn't particularly care how you feel about it. "That's me," I replied, stopping about 10 feet away from the group. "What can I help you with?" "My name is Margaret Winters, and I'm the president of the Willowbrook HOA. These are my fellow board members." She gestured to the 4 other people flanking her. "We need to discuss some serious matters regarding your property." I almost laughed. "HOA. Ma'am, I think you've got the wrong address. This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. We're not part of any homeowners association." That's when she pulled out her papers and everything went sideways. "Actually, Mr. Thompson, according to our research and these legal documents, your property sits partially on land that was designated as community property when the Willowbrook development was established in 2019. We've been trying to reach you for months about this matter." I felt my blood pressure spike. Community property? "Lady, I've owned this land free and clear since 2008. My grandfather bought the original parcel in 1954, and we've been adding to it ever since. There's no way any part of this ranch is community property." "I understand your confusion," she said in that condescending tone people use when they think you're stupid, but the county records show differently. "We have a court order here requiring you to cease all agricultural activities on the disputed portions of your land immediately." She handed me a stack of papers that felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. As I scanned through them, I saw official-looking seals and stamps, legal jargon I didn't understand, and most terrifyingly, a map that showed nearly 40% of my ranch highlighted in red as disputed territory. "This is insane," I said, looking up from the papers. "Even if there was some kind of paperwork mix-up, you can't just show up and tell me to stop working my own land. I've got cattle that need to graze, crops that need tending, and a business to run." "Mr. Thompson," said a thin man in a gray suit standing behind Margaret, "we're not unreasonable people. The HOA is willing to work with you on this matter. We understand you've made improvements to the land, and we're prepared to offer compensation for your inconvenience." "Compensation?" I could feel my voice rising. "Mister, this isn't an inconvenience. This is my life. My livelihood. My home." Margaret stepped forward again. "We're prepared to offer you $150,000 for the disputed acreage, plus an additional $50,000 for any structures you'll need to relocate. That's quite generous, considering the current market value." I looked at her like she'd grown a second head. The 40 acres they were claiming was worth at least $800,000, and that didn't even account for the improvements I'd made, the irrigation system, the fencing, the storage buildings, or the fact that it contains some of the best grazing land in the county. "You're talking about land that's worth nearly $1 million, and you want to pay me $200,000? I shook my head. "Even if your paperwork was legitimate, which I seriously doubt. That's insulting." "The offer is non-negotiable," Margaret said coldly. "You have 30 days to accept it and begin removing your property from the disputed area. After that, we'll be forced to take legal action to have you removed. That's when I knew this wasn't just some bureaucratic mistake. This was a deliberate attempt to steal my land, and I wasn't going to take it lying down. After they left, I immediately called my attorney, Jim Rodriguez, who'd handled all my property transactions over the years. When I described what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Marcus," Jim finally said, "this sounds like a land grab. But we need to take this seriously. Can you bring me all the paperwork they gave you, plus everything you have proving ownership of your property?" That afternoon, I drove into town with a box full of documents, deeds, surveys, tax records, insurance papers, everything I could find related to my ranch. Jim spent 2 hours going through it all while I sat in his office, drinking terrible coffee and trying not to panic. "Okay," he finally said, looking up from the papers. "The good news is that your ownership of this land is absolutely rock solid. You have clear title going back to your grandfather, and every survey, tax record, and legal document supports your claim. And the bad news? The bad news is that these HOA documents look legitimate too. Someone has filed paperwork with the county claiming that a portion of your land was mistakenly included in their development's common area designation. It's bureaucratic nonsense, but it's going to take time and money to straighten out." Jim leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "Marcus, I've seen this kind of thing before. Usually, it's developers or investment groups who identify valuable rural property and find ways to challenge the ownership through legal technicalities. They're hoping you'll either be intimidated into taking their lowball offer or that you won't have the resources to fight them in court. So what do? We fight. But I need to be honest with you, this could take months, maybe even years to resolve. And it's going to be expensive. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about my grandfather, who'd worked 3 jobs to save up enough money to buy the original 40 acres of what became our ranch. I thought about my father, who'd spent his whole life building it into something special. And I thought about my own kids, who deserved to inherit something that was rightfully theirs. "Whatever it takes, Jim. This is my family's legacy we're talking about." Over the next few weeks, I started doing my own investigation. I drove around the Willowbrook development, which was about 2 miles from my ranch, and talked to some of the residents. What I discovered made my blood boil. The development had been built by a company called Premier Properties, owned by a man named Richard Blackwood. The more I dug, the more I realized that this whole HOA dispute wasn't about community land at all, it was about water rights. You see, my ranch sits on top of one of the largest underground springs in the county. For generations, we'd used that water to irrigate our crops and provide for our cattle. But with the recent drought conditions, that spring had become incredibly valuable. And apparently, Premier Properties had promised the residents of Willowbrook that they'd have access to unlimited water resources when they bought their overpriced houses. The problem was, they didn't actually own any water rights. So they'd concocted this scheme to claim part of my land, specifically, the part where the spring was located, and force me to sell it to them at a fraction of its true value. I confirmed my suspicions when I met with Harold Peterson, a retired surveyor who'd worked in the county for over 40 years. He remembered the original surveys of both my property and the Willowbrook development. "Son," Harold told me over coffee at the local diner, "there's no way your land was ever part of that development's common area. I surveyed both properties myself, and there's a clear boundary between them. Someone's been playing fast and loose with the county records." That's when I decided to take the gloves off. I started by hiring a private investigator to look into Richard Blackwood and Premier Properties. What we found was a pattern of similar disputes across 3 different counties. In each case, Blackwood's company had used questionable legal tactics to acquire valuable rural properties at below-market prices. Next, I reached out to a local news reporter, Sarah Chen, who'd done investigative pieces on land disputes before. When I showed her the evidence we'd gathered, her eyes lit up. "Mr. Thompson, this is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told. Would you be willing to go on record about what's happening?" Within a week, Sarah had published a front-page article in the county newspaper titled, "Local Developer Accused of Land Grab Scheme." The story detailed how Premier Properties was using the HOA to intimidate rural landowners into selling their property for a fraction of its value. The response was immediate and overwhelming. I received dozens of phone calls from other property owners who'd had similar experiences with Blackwood's company. More importantly, the story caught the attention of the state attorney general's office, which announced they were opening an investigation into Premier Properties' business practices. But Blackwood and his HOA cronies weren't going down without a fight. 2 weeks after the newspaper article came out, I received a new set of legal papers. This time, they weren't just claiming my land, they were suing me for $500,000 in damages, alleging that my refusal to comply with their demands had cost the HOA money and caused emotional distress to the Willowbrook residents. I'll admit, that lawsuit shook me. Even though I knew it was frivolous, defending against it was going to cost me a fortune. I was looking at legal bills that could easily exceed $100,000, money I didn't have just sitting around. That's when something amazing happened. The story of my fight against the HOA had spread beyond our local community. I started receiving checks in the mail from people all over the country who wanted to help me fight back. Most were small amounts, $20, $50, but they added up quickly. A local businessman named Tom Garrett, whose family had also been ranchers for generations, set up a legal defense fund for me. Within a month, we'd raised over $75,000 from people who believed in the principle that a man's property rights should be protected. But the real breakthrough came when my private investigator uncovered something explosive. While digging through county records, he found evidence that Richard Blackwood had bribed a county clerk to alter the original survey documents, making it appear that part of my land was designated as common area for the Willowbrook development. We turned this evidence over to both the Attorney General and the FBI, since bribing a government official is a federal crime. Within days, FBI agents raided Premier Properties offices and Richard Blackwood's home. The dominoes started falling fast after that. The county clerk who'd taken the bribe was arrested and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Margaret Winters and the other HOA board members were also arrested on charges of conspiracy and fraud. But the best part was yet to come. It turned out that Richard Blackwood had been running this same scam in multiple states. The FBI investigation uncovered a network of shell companies, fraudulent documents, and bribed officials stretching from Texas to Montana. We weren't just dealing with a local land grab, we'd stumbled onto a massive criminal enterprise. 3 months after those HOA officers first showed up at my door, I was sitting in a federal courtroom watching Richard Blackwood get sentenced to 15 years in prison for fraud, bribery, and racketeering. Margaret Winters received 5 years, and the other HOA board members got probation and hefty fines. But the legal victory was only part of the story. As the criminal case unfolded, it became clear that dozens of families had been victimized by Blackwood's schemes. Properties that had been sold under duress were returned to their original owners. Families who'd been forced off their land were compensated for their losses. In my case, not only did I keep my ranch, but the court ordered Premier Properties to pay me $2.3 million in damages for the stress, legal fees, and lost income I'd suffered during the dispute. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life, but honestly, the vindication meant more to me than the check. The money allowed me to expand the ranch, adding another 200 acres and upgrading all our equipment. I also used part of it to establish a legal defense fund for other rural property owners facing similar challenges. Because what happened to me wasn't unique, it's happening all over the country as developers and investment groups target family-owned land. Today, my ranch is thriving. My cattle are healthy, my crops are growing, and my family's legacy is secure. But more importantly, we send a message to anyone who thinks they can intimidate honest, hard-working people into giving up what's rightfully theirs. The whole experience taught me something important. Sometimes, you have to be willing to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Those HOA officers thought they could waltz onto my property and scare me into submission. They thought I was just some ignorant country boy who wouldn't know how to fight back. They were wrong. I'd like to say that this was an isolated incident, but sadly, it's not. Across America, family farms and ranches are under constant pressure from developers, government agencies, and yes, even homeowner associations that overstep their bounds. They use legal intimidation, bureaucratic red tape, and sometimes outright fraud to separate honest people from their property. But here's what I want everyone watching this to understand: you don't have to take it lying down. Know your rights. Keep your paperwork organized. Don't be afraid to ask questions when something doesn't seem right. And most importantly, don't let anyone intimidate you into giving up what's yours. If you're facing a similar situation, document everything. Take pictures, keep records, and don't sign anything without having a lawyer look at it first. There are organizations and legal aid societies that can help if you can't afford an attorney on your own. The other thing I learned is that communities can be incredibly powerful when they come together to fight injustice. The support I received from neighbors, strangers, and fellow landowners made all the difference in my case. People understand that property rights are fundamental to our freedom, and they're willing to stand up for those principles. Looking back on it now, I'm actually grateful that Margaret Winters and her cronies showed up at my door that October morning. Not because I enjoyed the stress and uncertainty of fighting them, but because their greed and overreach led to the exposure of a much larger criminal operation. Who knows how many more families would have been victimized if we hadn't fought back. The ranch is quiet now, the way it should be. The only visitors we get these days are friends, family, and the occasional journalist wanting to follow up on the story. Duke still barks when cars pull up, but it's a friendly bark now, not the warning he gave those HOA officers. Every morning when I walk out to check on the cattle, I think about what almost happened. I think about how close I came to losing everything my family had worked for. And I'm reminded of why it's so important to stand up to bullies, whether they're wearing business suits or carrying official-looking papers. Your property, your home, your livelihood, these things are worth fighting for. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And if you're ever faced with a situation like mine, remember this: they're counting on you to be scared, confused, and alone. Don't give them that satisfaction. Fight back, ask for help, and never, ever give up on what's rightfully yours. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about land or money or legal technicalities. It's about the principle that in America, a person's hard work and dedication should be protected and respected. It's about ensuring that future generations can pursue their dreams without fear of having them stolen by those who think might makes right. My grandfather would be proud to know that his ranch is still in the family, still productive, and still a symbol of what's possible when you're willing to work hard and stand up for what's right. And maybe, just maybe, this story will inspire someone else to fight back when their turn comes. Because it's not just about winning or losing. It's about sending a message that the American dream is still alive, and it's still worth defending.